Experimental and quasi-experimental research. This is Marianne Nilias Apat, the discussant of this morning. Experimental research, or another term is experimentation, is research conducted using a scientific approach using two or more variables. The first variable is a constant that you can manipulate to see the differences caused in the second variable. Most studies under quantitative research methods are experimental in nature. Example of experimental research is the quantitative research method. The research should establish a notable cause and effect. What is meant by quantitative research? Quantitative research is referred to as the process of collecting as well as analyzing numerical data. It is generally used to find patterns, average, predictions, as well as cause and effect relationships between the variables being studied. What is quantitative research example? An example of quantitative research is the survey conducted to understand the amount of time a doctor takes to tend a patient when the patient walks into the hospital. What are the characteristics of quantitative research? Okay, number one is the large sample size. Two, the structured research methods. Three, highly reliable outcome. Number four, usable outcome. Close-ended questions. Numerical outcomes. Generalization of outcome and the prior study. What is the main purpose of experimental research? The purpose of experimental research strategy is to establish the existence of cause and effect relationship between two variables. To accomplish this goal, an experiment manipulates one variable while a second variable is measured and other variables are controlled. Experimental research is a kind of study that rigidly follows a scientific research design. It involves testing or attempting to prove a hypothesis by way of experimentation. As such, it uses one or more independent variables, manipulating them and then using them on one or more dependent variables. How do you do experimental research? Consider your variables and how they are related. Write a specific testable hypothesis. Design experimental treatments to manipulate your independent variable. Okay, number one is define your variables. Number two, write your hypothesis. Three, design your experimental treatments. Four, assign your subjects to treatment groups. Okay, what is quasi-experimental research? Quasi-experimental research is similar to experimental research in that there is manipulation of an independent variable. It differs from experimental research because either there is no control group, no random selection, no random assignment, and or no active manipulation. What is quasi-experimental versus experimental research? With an experimental research study, the participants in both the treatment or product users and control or product non-users groups are randomly assigned. Quasi-experimental research designs do not randomly assign participants to treatment or control groups for comparison. Where is quasi-experimental design used? Quasi-experimental studies encompass a broad range of non-randomized intervention studies. These designs are frequently used when it is not logically feasible or not ethical to conduct a randomized, controlled trial, the gold standard of causal research design. What are the characteristics of quasi-experimental designs? The quasi-experimental designs does not randomly assign groups to the participants, rather it studies their nature and then treats them accordingly. Why would you use a quasi-experimental design? Quasi-experimental studies can be used to measure the impact of large-scale interventions or policy changes where data are reported in aggregate and multiple measures of an outcome over time. Example is monthly rates are collected. Why is it sometimes a good idea to conduct quasi-experiments? Understand why quasi-experiments can be a useful research design. One good reason is that it may be the one only possible way to study the impact of a natural event. For example, how residents cope after a flood. External validity may be higher the true experiment as it allows for experiment in natural setting. Is quasi-experimental research quantitative or qualitative? Quasi-experiments resemble quantitative and qualitative experiments but lack random allocation of groups or proper controls, so firm statistical analysis can be very difficult. Okay, that's all for the experimental and quasi-experimental research.